For those who don't know me, I have a company called Userscape. We've been making customer support software for about 9 years. We have 2 products, HelpSpot and Snappy. So HelpSpot is downloadable, as Rob mentioned. That's still our main product, the big product. And then Snappy is a new SaaS customer support tool. I do Bootstrap.fm. How many people have heard Bootstrap.fm? Whoa! All right. So you might not be surprised that this talk will kind of be part tactics, part minor rant. So we'll see how that goes. And I do it with Andrei Butov there. I figured get him a little screen time. We also have the Discuss forums, so great place for everybody to check out. A lot of really interesting Bootstrap-oriented discussion going on there. So I'm a little bit old school, kind of like LL Cool J here with this big box. So I want to talk a little bit about the business kind of side of things and how customer support has directly impacted Userscape. It's kind of hard to get information on that. And the 2 talks leading up, Dave and Josh, were actually really good lead-ins for a lot of this. So to me, customer support is the original growth hack. Like before we all got obsessed with measuring every little minor thing somebody touches on your site, right? Like you just had a great product and you supported it well and you had happy customers, and that's how you got more customers, is they referred you and they brought you with them to their next jobs and things like that. So here's our growth hacker in residence. That's Max, my son. He's obsessed with metrics, as you can see. But it's just something I like people to think about. These days with customers, we tend to think about customers like this, right? Like churn, what's their lifetime value, what's the average revenue per XYZ. And we kind of lose sight a little bit of the human factor. I kind of feel like we're doing this to the customers a little bit. Like we're going to turn them into the battery, and we're just going to plug them in. And that stuff's important, but I always try to keep in mind, the human factor. So you have children, your customers have children, they have their own hopes and dreams and desires, and being your battery is not necessarily on that list. So trying to keep a picture of your customers in your mind, just always trying to be human with your support is really a big part of great support, is just being human about it. Okay, so enough touchy-feely. I know you guys are all capitalist bastards, so we'll get into some money to start things off. So to me, support is sales, right? Especially for most of our size companies, you're not going to have a distinction between your support channel and your sales channel. You might have different email addresses or different forms or whatever, but at the end of the day, they're all going to be coming into the same place. And usually the same people are going to be dealing with those. So I wanted to share some kind of concrete examples of what that means and what that's meant for Userscape. So I wanted to look back at Userscape from 2005 to 2008. So that's when we first started the business. It's just me and my wife. And we didn't really know what we were doing, essentially. We scratched our own itch. Back then, there wasn't a lot of web-based help desk software. It was a lot of client-server. I came from a job where we only had 3 lines in a mainframe terminal where you could enter the customer's issue. So that wasn't ideal, and it didn't do email or anything like that. So we built our first product, HelpSpot. So we had no employees. We did no marketing. We did no advertising. We had no email list. We didn't do any A/B testing. We didn't track anything at all, really. The only thing we actually did, we did have a mailing list of beta signups, 80 people. I emailed them one time to let them know it was out, and I never emailed any of them ever again. We did do a little bit of SEO, but we were never number 1 or anything like that, or anywhere close to the first position. So, we had no idea what we were doing. Like, literally, that was me just like working around the clock, just trying to figure out what the heck we're going to do. But the only thing I knew is I had a product that solved the problem, and that I knew how to support it well. And so here's some actual numbers, which I think are kind of telling. So we did nothing but support the product in these first 3.5 years, nothing at all. So the first year we made $15,000. The second year, it doubled, 10 times to 123, and I was like, whoa, because I only thought I'd ever make $60,000. Like that was my goal, 60,000, and I'm out. So then 264, then 488. I had no idea what was going on. So just to show you, I graphed our ad spend and marketing spend. So we spent nothing. The only thing we spent is in 2008 there, 14,000, 10,000 of which was an ad on the deck, which was not a good idea. We didn't even have one conversion off of that. What I want to look at though in even more detail, so that's kind of like the overview, right, is our first 100 customers, because that's a more manageable size to think about. And your early customers, kind of like what Josh was saying in a certain sense, the early customers to me are really hard to hold on to, right? These are the people who go through I trashed all my code and rebuilt everything in 2 weeks, right? They go through that, and they go through the horrible bugs that, where nothing works for days on end and all those kind of things. So these first 100, I wanted to really look into how we held on to them and what that meant for us. So over the past 9 years, those first 100 customers have submitted about 1,700 support tickets. The majority of those 100 customers are still customers, not all of them, but the majority. And this is what we made on those customers in the past 9 years. So 2005, 2006 were the first 100 customers' initial sales, $90,000 in licenses. And then over the next 9 years on support and on upselling of additional licenses, we made another $200,000 from just those first 100 customers. So $207,000. To me, that's kind of a quantifiable thing. That's what our customer support was worth to those first 100 people. Those people stuck with us. Every year they pay their support renewal. Every year, we're helping them and encouraging them and helping them grow their businesses. And in turn, they're buying more licenses and generating additional revenue for us. So, it's hard to make the connection between customer support and revenue. There's not a clean way to do it. It's just not something easily trackable to say, oh, I helped this person and that equals X dollars. But in aggregate, over this long time span that we happen to have, I think it's a little bit interesting to look at it that way. Now, over that time span, this was our support volume, so it kind of went up with revenue as you'd expect. It was just me answering support for these first 3.5 years. So at one point, we were doing about 400 tickets a month with just me answering those. And one of the metrics I do like to look at in support is first response speed. So this is basically how fast you initially reply to the customer. And for the most part, we did pretty good. For companies kind of our size, if you're under an hour, that's pretty good. Obviously, as you get bigger, companies can have a lot of support people, and you see companies at sometimes just a couple minutes. But for if you're just by yourself or just a couple people, then under an hour is really good. And we were able to keep that most of the way until the end, and then we hired a support person, which is why this is also kind of a good thing to keep an eye on. If you see your response speed is getting longer and longer and longer, it's probably time to look at outsourcing or either outsourcing support or hiring part-time support or full-time person, depending on your volumes. And then this will come up a little bit later as well, but I just wanted to show the categorical breakdown here of the support we did. And now remember, this is all for HelpSpot, so this is an on-premise product. So there's a lot of weird technical support, Windows 2000 server, weirdly configured with 7 help desk apps, and they're trying to try HelpSpot also, and it doesn't work. So we have to help them with those things. But even so, you can see that we have account issues, which is kind of like a sales category we use, pre-sales, and how-to. So these are all things not really related to direct kind of support at all in terms of technical customer support. And that'll come up in a little bit. So how do we do support? So we're going to get into a little more kind of tactics of it. And I'm not going to beat you over the head too hard with this, but you should probably have a support tool, whether it's one of mine or somebody else's. But email really does break down pretty quick. Something gets marked red, then you miss it, and you don't mark it unread because you want to go back to it later and actually reply to the person. You forget to do that, and now you never get back to them, and then you get an email 2 days later from a very angry person because you never got back to them. You also don't have really any reporting. You're not going to be able to get first response speed. You're not going to be able to see who's assigned things like that. So as you get just a little bit bigger, even if it's just you and one person who works part-time, at that point, it becomes very complicated to see what they've done, what you've done, what they're working on, what you're working on. So you do probably want some type of support tool. Okay, so for small companies, these are the support channels I really like to focus on. So a help site, in-app support, and email. So before we get into details on those, marketing, the stuff you do for marketing is not support. So that came up in the earlier talk. You're going to be blogging. People are going to ask you stuff on the blog about, hey, how do you do this in your app? That's not where you want to answer them. You don't want to be trying to answer people in all these different places you market. So that's where the help site comes in. You want to forward people to the help site, give them your email address, get them into the channels that you maintain. And don't try to be everywhere answering support on Facebook and all these other places. It's just way too much for really any company up before you get into having numerous support people. You want to really funnel them into just a couple places that you can effectively manage. So I have to ask just for Twitter. Twitter's kind of an in-between. So if you're on Twitter, which I'm sure everybody is, obviously people are going to ask you questions on Twitter. So kind of my rule of thumb is if you can answer them in 140 characters, then answer them in 140 characters. But for most kind of things, you're going to need a more in-depth response, or you're going to try to answer them in 140 characters, and they're going to get back to you and say, well, I don't understand what you mean. And so then you're going to have to go back and forth, back and forth. So again, send them to the help site, give them the email, say, hey, just send us an email, and we can then go back and forth properly on that with the proper space to elaborate. Okay, so I'm going to talk about help sites. This is kind of the main content you generally want on your help sites pretty early on. You can get into a lot more stuff than this, but detailed information on any initial setup. So like for our product, you have to integrate your email with the products. So you want to have very in-depth instructions on that because that's something you're just going to reference all the time. People are going to be looking for that on their own, so you want to have that. Settings is a really good one because a lot of times settings, as a developer, you just say, oh, I'll put a setting, and it'll change the way the app works entirely, just this little toggle, and customers don't necessarily understand the implications always of those settings. So I find I refer to settings documentation a lot, so having document settings, and then any advice or best practices. Okay, so here's just an example help site. A couple things here to point out. You want to always have a clear way to contact support. So this has been something I've been seeing a lot lately is help sites with no way to actually contact support. So that's not good. So you want to make sure that if somebody ends up on your help site and they don't find what they need, it's very clear how to get to you. Again, you don't want this person to say, oh, heck with it. I'll go over to the competing system where they are willing to help me. So make sure it's very clear how you get a hold of somebody. It's good to be very clear also about where the customer is. So this is the help site for Snappy. Very clear we are. They might have been coming in on Google. Who knows how they got over here originally. Sometimes you might have your customers ending up on your support site. So again, it's good to be clear about where the person is. And then, of course, search. These days, everybody wants to be able to search. So you need to be able to search your help site. Pretty common. A couple of little things. You want to pick a URL that reinforces that they're in the right place. So help.besnappy.com, or maybe it's company/support, whatever the case may be. Doesn't matter the particulars there, but just want to be clear about, again, where they are. Especially nowadays, you'll have resources other places. So for instance, in our case, we have support docs on our API. Those are actually in GitHub. So make sure you link out to those things. The help site should be kind of the central place where anybody can show up and be able to find everything you have available, even if some of those things aren't in the help site itself, so sending them over to GitHub. And then also navigation. So navigation is something that kind of sometimes falls out of favor, but I'm a big fan of having specific navigation on the help site because while people tend to want to just say, oh, search for the help, a lot of times the customers don't know the proper term in order to do that. And so they end up just searching randomly, and they can't just browse for the different areas and say, oh, yes, users, that's where my question is. And it also lets them discover much more easily, where if it's just search-based, they're not going to really be able to discover anything. So this is just another company, Audiophile Engineering. This is a HelpSpot installation. You can see very clear how you contact support, very clear where to search, and very clear to navigate so you can go into their documentation for each app. Another one, Campaign Monitor. So this particular site isn't on any support tool at all. They just built it, and obviously you could build it in WordPress or any other CMS these days. But again, very clear where to contact. You can search, you can navigate. Okay, so some help site tips. This one's going to be a little ranty. Don't require registration. So this is one of my pet peeves. I really don't like registration for customer support sites. I'm already your customer. I'm paying you money, and you're putting this barrier between me and you. And a lot of times, I'm only contacting you rarely, so I'm going to come back in a year and have to contact you again. I'm not going to remember the password. I'm going to have to go through the whole forgotten password thing and reset my password, all just to ask you a question. I'm already paying you substantial amounts of money in most cases. So to me, this is kind of like a battery thing, right? Like you're turning the customer into a battery. You're trying to optimize for the metrics so heavily that you're like, okay, we'll just blockade these people until they log in and give us their information. And then the most infuriating part you'll find is that always, 100% of the time, if you're at a site that requires registration for support, if you go over to sales, you can get a sales email, or you can get into whatever the sales process is with no registration. And always, or almost always, that sales email just ends up in their ticket system. So then you'll get the reply from sales, and it's just in the ticket system, and they just say, okay, and they'll move it over to support. So you're making your customers jump through hoops that they don't need to jump through. Don't expose the internal metadata of your help desk. So this is things like status types, categories, anything like that. Nobody cares, right? Nobody cares that the internal status of your ticket is waiting for customer reply, right? It's totally irrelevant to the customer. They have a problem. They're waiting for you to give them the solution. That's it. So don't bog them down with a bunch of internal details. And then organize content for customers. So you see this a lot too with help systems that might be folder-based in their help sites, so a traditional knowledge base, where it's organized by the staff for themselves. So there's this deeply nested folder of information, and unless you're kind of on the inside, you don't really have any idea what the proper organization is or where anything you need might be. So you really want to keep it organized for the customer. Always keep the customer in mind. They don't know everything about your product. They don't know everything about the industry or the proper names for things often. So you kind of keep that in mind. Again, that's where navigation comes in to make it easily scannable, so they can kind of feel their way around a little bit. So in-app. There's not a lot to go over in-app. I think probably kind of the basics of this, but at the very least, here's customer I/O. You want to give them a link to your help site, and then probably have a way to explicitly contact support, as you can see at the bottom there. So very simple, but just making sure when they're in your app, they know how to get a hold of support. Here's Snappy, our product, and we obviously use Snappy to support Snappy, which is kind of handy. And so we have a widget. And so, this is another kind of more advanced, if your support tool supports this kind of thing, it's kind of handy. You can search from right within the app. You can navigate from within the app. You can also contact support from within the app. So you're not actually sending people out to another website that can do it all right from within the app. I'm going to show off a little bit here. But another thing that kind of bothers me is in support documentation, you often duplicate yourself because you'll have in-app help, right? Like so you have a little question mark, next to form fields and things like that. And so in your app code, you have help documentation. And then you also have a help site, which has the same documentation, but they're in separate places. So you have to maintain those. They always get out of sync with each other. Developers build a new feature and they update the in-app one, but they don't update the docs because they don't go over to the docs and all that kind of stuff. So in Snappy, and I'm sure there's a couple other tools that probably do this as well. As you can see here, if you click a link in the app that's for help text, it actually opens up the widget and pulls that from our help site FAQ system. So it's only in one place. It's not duplicated. When we update it in the one place, it's updated everywhere. And we don't make mistakes about what's documented and have errors like that. OK, so email. So email is definitely still king in the support world. Seen a lot of support tools, a lot of new support tools that say, we're not doing email anymore. Email's old and funky. No more email. And 6 months later, they add email, always, because customers want to talk to people, talk to companies through email. So you obviously need to handle email. Pretty much all your support will be email, either directly or even if they contact you initially through a form or widget or whatever, that'll end up turning into an email conversation. So we'll talk about the ABCs of email a little bit here. I got this from Glenn Ross, right? So this is how the scene goes, I think. Always be compassionate, right? So you want to be compassionate, just like Alec Baldwin said. Always be compassionate. So it's hard, right? It's hard to be compassionate. It's really hard, especially when you are the developer of the product, too, because it's very personal. And when people say, your app sucks and I hate you, then you take that personally, like, oh man. And it's only because they couldn't find a setting somewhere, right? It's a little thing. It's always a little thing, but the customer gets upset. You don't want to panic, right? So I'm always thinking this, right? We want to turn that frown upside down. So that's how you have to think. You always want to have the moral high ground in the conversation with the customer. So even though they're getting upset and using abrasive language, you always want to think, how am I going to turn this customer around? How am I going to make them happy? And a lot of times, that customer you turn around, that's the one that loves you the most. That's the one that goes on Twitter and says, those guys are the best, because you turned them around from being so upset to being, the magician who made it all okay. So this is kind of my strategy for that. I pretty much always apologize. Doesn't matter if I should apologize, like if I was wrong or not, right? Apologize, kind of in that first email back. And then I ignore frumpiness. So any other kind of back and forth after that initial one, I apologize. And then I focus entirely on the problem. I don't think about anything else but the problem. And no matter what they say back to me, my reply is always something helpful towards getting us to the solution. So I ignore any frumpiness. And I just say, OK, well, check this and that. And then they'll write back, and they'll have checked it, and they'll throw in a little one-liner maybe that's supposed to get me or whatever, but that's fine. And I ignore that, and I carry on. And because once you solve the problem, that's it. Then they're happy. So it's all about solving the problem. OK, so replying to the actual emails. This is how you start the reply to a support email. A proper greeting, always. So you could say hello, you could say hi, whatever you want to do, but not just the name. It's too formal. We're trying to get on a human level here with the customer. And definitely not no name or nothing at the top, which I see quite a lot too, just a dump into here's some info with I can't even bother to type hi and put your name in. Or even bother to set up the support tool to do that for me. Outro. So the outro is where I like to have a little fun. I stole this one from Chase Clemens of Support Ops and the Basecamp support team. So if you have any other questions, just let me know, and I'll be happy to help. So letting the customer know, hey, if you have more questions, keep them coming. And have an awesome Monday. Like just a little bit of humanity, right? Like as if you were in person there. it goes a long way. Because remember, this is also sales, right? You want to stay connected to the customer. You want them to have that positive experience. So little things like that make a huge difference. It takes no time. It can be automated, honestly. But just that little thing is a huge help. Keep it human. So another kind of practical thing is canned responses. Respond 5,000% faster. I measured that. It's a fact. But really, I mean, you have to use canned responses. But you have to be careful. You have to be careful with canned responses. Because you don't want to be like, I don't know, if you've ever emailed like Amazon, right? Like you get back the worst canned responses. It's totally generic and horrible, and you know it's just some machine that churned it out, and it's horrific. So you don't want to do that. So the intro, the greeting, and the kind of outro to the email help with that a lot. And then also, I use canned responses, not necessarily for entire replies. So use just a paragraph, right? Like customize the beginning and the end. But that bit of text that's like how you actually reset your password, where you actually go, just shove that in with the canned response and save yourself that paragraph of typing. I use them a lot just for links too. Like people always ask for the pricing page. So I just can insert the link to the pricing page, but then the rest of my answer might be custom. Just makes you way more efficient, eliminates common mistakes, all that kind of stuff. Again, if you're using a support tool, you also have other options here usually, and a good one, where you can, for instance, whenever you say use the password canned response, right? Whenever you use that canned response, it'll also set the category of that request, and it can set the status, and it can set other fields that might be options in your system, so that you can just use the canned response, hit update and close, and be done without having to click all those off. And when you're doing 400 tickets a month, that's important. That's click saved, which is money saved. Okay, so organizing tickets. I'm not huge on necessarily having a ton of crazy organization. Like we have customers in HelpSpot who have 200 custom fields, and the support staff have to fill in these fields in different scenarios and things like that. So for a big formal help desk, sometimes they need those things. But for our size companies, just the basic stuff is fine. So categorize them, just like I was able to show you from 9 years ago, the types of requests we got. That's good information to have, especially again when you start to maybe get to scaling the support team. To have some idea of the types of requests that come in is pretty important, at least on a broad level. And I'm also big on broad categorization. So you don't want to, when you go to think about categorizing, you don't want to have 50 options. You want 6, 8, maybe 10 categories on the outside. We don't even have 10. But just keep it simple so you can quickly select, is it pre-sales, is it a technical issue? Keep it simple so that you can go through it fast but still collect that basic data. I like to assign to individuals. So if you do have more than one person working support in any capacity, it's usually good to try to not assign to groups of people because they just end up thinking the other person's doing it, and then that causes delays. It's usually better to assign to a particular person and then let that ticket be reassigned if you need to reassign it to somebody else to work on it. And then prioritize. Your time is kind of limited. You got to prioritize them. Generally, I prefer very simple prioritization also. So urgent, not urgent, done. Obviously, you can get into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all kinds of different schemes. But generally, I find urgent, not urgent is really all you need. Because there's either urgent, the person's freaking out, or it's not urgent, and it's fine. So you get to it after the urgent ones. Okay, so schedule. So this is mostly for those of you who are on your own doing support right now. How you schedule these so that you're getting back to people efficiently. And so it's something you want to put a little bit of thought into. So this is kind of the schedule I like to use. First thing in the morning, then give yourself that break to do coding or marketing or whatever work needs to be done. Then after lunch, to kind of get your reply. So you respond to everybody in the morning. Those people are going to reply to you. You can then get back to them after lunch. And then end of the day, kind of make sure you clean sweep to have that all cleared out. And again, trying to keep it under an hour on that first response if you can. Okay, so talk a little bit about scaling support. So this was a mistake I made, is I definitely didn't hire early enough for support. Because remember this chart here, you can see at the end, kind of got away from me a little bit there. It was taking us a long time to reply. So, there's a lot of different options out there now. I'd say more than 2005. So hire somebody part-time, hire a virtual assistant. I think Patrick, if he's here, uses a virtual assistant with Snappy. So, there's a lot of options. And again, if you know what your support is, a lot of times sales support or basic account issues, how-tos, right? Those are easy things to bring somebody on and let them help with. You can train them. If you've been organized about your support over time, you'll already have everything kind of ready. So you can eliminate that low-hanging fruit. You can just drop somebody in there, and they already have the FAQs they need. They already have the canned responses built. You can do a little bit of training with them, and they're going to be able to effectively reply to a pretty sizable portion of your customer base early on. This is even more true with SaaS apps, which is, I assume, what most of you are working on, where there's basically no technical support. So there's nobody emailing you with, hey, my Windows 2003 server is broken, right? So you don't have any of those. So you pretty much only have, how do I do something, a sales question, and those kind of things which are, very easy to train somebody who's not necessarily a developer or very technical. Another nice tactic here, too, is if you hire a part-time support person, then especially if they can work the mornings, that's really ideal. So if they could work just like a 4-hour shift in the morning, then they're going to be able to what's called triage your support. So they can go through all your support, answer anything that they can answer, and then they can escalate to you, what they can't handle. And they can still do an initial reply to those people so that the person can get an initial response. Okay, we got your issue, we're working on it, I've escalated it because I need to send it up to the developers. So the customer gets a fast reply, and you can handle that then after lunch or later in the day and keep the whole morning to yourself, which is usually when most people are most productive. So yeah, this is why ticket organization is important. Again, if you're using all these, the systems, canned responses, categorization, FAQs, much easier to get somebody rolling very quickly, and for them just to even be able to properly support your customers because it's all set up for them. As you get bigger, this is something I definitely like. Everyone does support, so we do that at Userscape. Developers do support, everybody does support, and that works out pretty well as well. And again, with a SaaS app, normally support people are pretty early hires, but with a SaaS app, if you're organized about your support, you might not have to really hire a support person kind of early on, or maybe just a part-time one. And you can put more of those resources maybe into developers or sales or marketing or wherever you think those would be better spent. So as you do scale your support, one of the problems is that then you're kind of out of the loop. So you're used to seeing everything and knowing what people are saying and what features they're asking for and all the kind of things, and now you're not that person getting all the emails. So this is really, to me, is a management issue, right? Like this is about training people who work for you what to do. So they need to keep you in the loop. So things like bugs and features obviously can be logged and issue trackers. But where I see this fail a lot is that there'll be mechanisms for reporting up the chain of command problems, right? So somebody's freaking out, there's a bug, there's mechanisms for that. There's never, ever a mechanism for the successes. So nobody ever puts in place a mechanism for the support team did something great, or a customer's super happy. So that's something you want to think about. You want to make sure to tell your staff, like, hey, when somebody's super happy, like, let me know that. And then you can work that into marketing and testimonials and all those kind of things. But you want to stay in the loop on the successes the same way you stay in the loop on problems. And you can use chat for that if you're a remote team. Our support tools have mechanisms built in that kind of let you do that, escalate or successes as well as problems. So different ways to do it. So kind of the last thing I want to cover is surveys. So I like periodic surveys because I think it gives the customers a chance to kind of rate your support over a period of time. So it depends on the business, but it might be every 6 months or every year. I'm not a big fan of surveys in each support email because they kind of degrade into just the way the people who are mad tell you they're mad and route around your support process. And again, I kind of view this as a management issue. Your support team should be able to recognize when somebody's getting upset. It's really not difficult. It's usually very, very clear when somebody is unhappy. So I don't like that idea of putting the burden on the customer in every interaction with you. Here's a link, survey us, survey us, survey us, survey us. Like, that's not the solution for that. And if you do want to track that, track it on the support side, right? The support staff, again, I've been handling support for 10 years. I never have a problem identifying somebody who's unhappy or one who's ecstatically happy. So track those things on the support end. Okay, so then this one, well, a pet peeve also, the follow-up survey a few days later. So like we all hate these, right? Don't you hate these? Like when you email a company and then they solve your problem, hopefully, and then 2 days later, they spam you with a link that's like, survey us about how we did, and it's every single time you contact them, 2 days later, you get this email. So again, to me, this is, again, the battery thing. You're just trying to push your issues, your tracking, your metrics onto the customer. So I would recommend you don't do this, but maybe that's just me. So, big recap time. To me, support is sales. You want to think about it that way and always trying to delight the customers because over time, that's how you're going to build your business. Those customers, they're going to upgrade to the bigger plan. Their business grows, they expand. People who work at those companies, they get new jobs. They say, hey, that's Snappy, that was the best. We love that thing. Why aren't we using that here? This is ridiculous. You're using this other horrible tool, right? So that's how you get those referrals. Support channels, help site, in-app email. The rest, pretty much ignore, with maybe the exception of Twitter. And be organized, scale your support early. Thanks.
The man who's about to speak, he was up on a mountain about 36 hours ago and acquired a ticket from someone who wanted a refund, and this is his only change of clothes because he literally is in hiking gear. So after this, come up and I have some T-shirts I can give you. There's changes here.
Take up a collection.
Regarding email, I totally see everything about that, but do you still do telephone support, and how do you mesh the telephone support with all the kind of the tagging and all that with the email support?
Yeah, great question. So telephone support, in certain industries, you definitely need it. So with HelpSpot, we do telephone support. How we handle it is we actually use Ruby, which is like a receptionist service. And so primarily we let them answer the calls because we don't have enough people to live answer phone support. So we let them answer the calls. And then they send us like either a description that they type out or voicemail, and then we'll call them back. So that's the primary way we handle that. It really is pretty effective. I know it's kind of fallen out of favor doing phone support, so I didn't really spend a lot of time on it or any time on it. But if you use a system like that where you time shift it, the way you can time shift email, then it is much more doable for a small company. And especially if you're selling anything kind of enterprise grade, I think that it's important. Honestly, not many people actually call you. So it's a nice addition. Certainly if you have like a tiered plan, it's an obvious thing to say, and 3 tiers up is phone support. And then tracking wise, again, with the support tool, usually you can just tag it as phone, or some will have, like in HelpSpot, there's a specifically way to tag it phone versus email versus something else. So you can tag it that way, and then we're able to track it. And we'll just enter a short description and tag it as phone. Great question.
There was another question up here.
Sorry. How do you avoid the feelings of personal, like getting attacked or something? Right. And how do you avoid ignoring email support? Right.
Well, it's tricky. I mean, honestly, at Userscape, we really only had one truly bad customer. in all 9 years where they were just bad to work with. So everybody else is like, they're just frustrated. So I think you just have to really keep that in mind. Like, you know what it's like, right? On the other end, where you're trying to fix something, you're trying to do something, the tool's working against you, and you're just frustrated by it. So I don't have a basically my motivation really is kind of like I said, like, if you focus on turning them around and making them happy, then at the end of that conversation, it's gonna be good. Like, they're gonna be happy, you're gonna be happy. Usually it's not even something that complicated. It's usually a small thing, oftentimes, that kind of people fly off the handle about. So if you kind of stay focused on the end, so just stay focused on fixing the problem is always the main thing, because if you fix the problem, they're gonna be happy. So fixing the problem, and then just kind of focusing on the end game, the long-term value of turning this customer around versus taking it personal and getting down into an attack back to them or even getting rude with them. So a lot of people obviously aren't going to go all the way back to attacking the customer, but it's a very fine line to even just getting a little bit rude. Like, when they're rude with you and you just get a little bit rude back with them, that's bad, because then they're going to really be upset, right? And then you're going to have a situation that even if you fix the problem, they're not going to be happy anyway because you were rude to them. So if you just stay above that, then when you fix the problem, you're going to be golden.
We have time for 2 more.
So as one of the few people that I've come across that is not doing SaaS support, and so you're like you said, you have users using your software on Windows, and you have technical support questions about server this, server that.
Right.
So we're in the same boat, desktop software, and 99% of our technical support questions require a lot of domain knowledge. Like Windows this, Windows that, Windows not working, this, that.
Right.
How do you bring on new support staff, give them a crash course on all this? It's huge domain knowledge.
Right. There's not an easy solution, really. It kind of comes back to whole team support, really, for us. So, like, since the developers do support and they're not kind of separated out as people who don't do support, you kind of have to get a 2-for-1 in that when you're a small-sized company. So you have the frontline support person usually who can handle all the simple stuff, and then they're going to have to escalate to somebody with more domain knowledge when you get into those tricky things where it just requires somebody to be who knows about Windows XP, and there's not really a good way around that. The best way around it, though, is to make sure you just stay up with those bugs, right? Because a lot of times it's bugs, or it's not really a bug, right? But it's like this gray area where it's not their fault, but it's not your fault. It's kind of weird. So those things, I always like to make sure we fix those, because then at least you're never going to get that weird one again, and just trying to stay on top of it that way. But yeah, it's hard too. The nice thing about doing it that way is, in terms of having developers do support, is it is very tricky to hire a developer for only support. Like, there's not a lot of developers who want to be only a support person. So if you have that model where, okay, like, they're doing some support and maybe they're taking an hour of their day and doing some support, on the flip side, they're still getting 7 hours of development time. So it's not so tricky to find somebody for that scenario as it is when you're just trying to say, okay, you're a professional developer, but you're only going to do customer support 8 hours a day.
For our self-funded startups, do you see anything for a while wrong with posting like office hours and adhering to them, saying Monday through Friday, 10 to 5 or 9 to 5? That's when we'll answer support questions. Yeah.
Absolutely not. You definitely want to do that for sure. So we do that 9 to 5 Eastern, and we sell to Yukon and huge corporations, and they're fine with that. Like, you're occasionally going to come across a customer who's like, hey, we need 24/7 support, and you can't do that. So I would definitely don't want to promise that, because for sure they're going to need support Sunday at midnight, and you're not going to be around, and they're going to flip out. But with few exceptions based a lot on your product, but in our case, a help desk is something that is heavily utilized, right? So we have HelpSpot customers with hundreds of staff in there using it 24/7, 365. And we still only have support 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and it's really never been an issue. So definitely want to be honest about that, and I don't think it's a problem at all to set those expectations for the customer.
Thanks again, Ian.
All right, hit me up later if you have any questions.